most of the people here will be fucking, you know, I mean, there's still a few, there's going to be a few fucking spies in here, as you hate the spies, mate. See when you control the narrative, mate. They're all poor, mate. You know, that Dave Irving story, but he interviews him and talk about the holidays. He says you won't find anything about it before 1973 when you Google it, because that's when they started owning all of the fucking...
Yes. Can everyone hear me? Hold on in, please. Hello. Everyone here, thank you for coming. If I could have some silence, please. Thank you for coming. Let's get on with the business as to why we're here. You're here to help and encourage those on the front line of the war on freedom that's going on around us. And the war on freedom at this time has chosen for its targets those who care for the old folks. I'm not going to use the bureaucrats acronym RACF or whatever they choose to call it. I'm talking about carers. I'm talking about people who care for older people who need to be looked after. Well, they're coming for them. First, they came for the carers. On the 17th of September, that's Friday of next week, these workers will turn up at their place of employment and they will be stood down and many will be sacked for simply turning up for work. You'll notice I call them workers. Are there any Labour Party members of Parliament in the audience today? No, I thought not. What a phony bunch of bastards they are. Parliament's sitting this week. No doubt there'll be Labour members behind me sitting with their ears to the window or ears to the door, elected here on the pretence that they represent working people. Well, we know better. The interests of working people are not their interests. Now what will happen on Friday of next week is that if these workers, these carers, turn up without proof that they have taken the potentially dangerous step of being injected with an experimental genetic treatment for an illness that's killed, wait for it, for an illness that's killed in the last 18 months in South Australia, wait for it, 5 people. 4 of those people had serious comorbidities. So let's talk the truth for a moment. At least the truth will be talked outside of Parliament. It's never talked inside it, is it? 4 of those people had comorbidities. It's sensible to say, it's truthful to say, that perhaps there's been only 1 victim of this pandemic in this state. What a phony pandemic. And it's on the basis of an alleged need to protect old folk from picking up this virus from the people they care for that they're being forced to take this experimental medicine. But look, it's even more irrational and evil than that. You know that. Think about the timing. They are doing this at a time when we know, when the evidence is in, that these viruses, that these medicines don't stop you spreading the virus. Is that better? They don't stop you spreading the virus. Israel is the most vaccinated country on earth. It's now official government policy in Israel that if you've had 2 jabs, you are officially treated as unvaccinated. The same will be the case for 3. The same will be the case for 4. So the pretense that these working people, these gentle people who care for people who are in need of care, a lot of them women, a lot of them migrant women to whom English isn't their first language, these are the people we're targeting on the pretense that they are to protect old people from receiving a virus, when the medicine itself, the medicine they're forcing them to take, transmits the virus. So you will lose your job if you don't take a jab that won't stop you spreading the virus to the old folks anyway. Vaccinated and unvaccinated alike have the same viral loads. Talk to any doctor. That's a very important part of the transmission process. Now, if there are any media here, where? They are having a talk. Well, I was going to ask them to do their job. Why not put what I've just put to you, which I'm in the business of telling the truth. I'm a former judge. I'm a barrister. I deal with the truth. We manage to elicit the interest of the media. Anyone here can repeat to you what I just said in case you missed it, but I'd like you to put it to Miss Spurrier at the next press conference you go to. Ask her to dispute what I'm telling you. She won't dispute what I'm telling you. She's never been asked to dispute any of the truthful statements about the PCR test, about masks, and about this completely unjustified insistence that aged care workers should undergo the jab, when it will have no utility at all. So it's not only unfair to carers, it's irrational. It helps no one but the bureaucrats and the others who are consumed with the control they have over us, the big pharma companies, the big media companies, and the technocrats who've been pushing this phony pandemic now for 18 months. They have conditioned us with masks and lockdowns, and we're now entering phase 3, they're after your jobs. As I say, they've picked on one of the most vulnerable parts of the workforce, gentle people, women in the main, not exclusively, but women, many of whom, to whom English isn't the first language, they picked on them because they're cowards and bullies, and we all know that. Well, let's deal with cowards and bullies in the way that we have all of our lives. Did you hear that brave Qantas pilot speak last night? He was talking about Mr. Health Hazard, Minister for Health in New South Wales, and he said quite appropriately, he reminded him of nothing so much as when he had to deal with a school bully. These people are bullies. Let's deal with them by standing up for this vulnerable part of our workforce in a way that those who are meant to protect them never do. The unions aren't interested in protecting them. The nurses union aren't interested in protecting them. The nurses union is full of the kind of people who want to get their very ample backsides on one of these seats in Parliament. That's what they're doing, or they want to sit on the superannuation boards. How about doing what they were designed to do in the first place? What's going on in society today? No one is carrying out the task that they are there to fulfill. That includes medical practitioners, by the way. Are there any doctors here today supporting these aged care workers who are charged with the care of their patients? Where are they? Can I say I'm not surprised? I'm not surprised. The medical profession has not covered itself in glory, ladies and gentlemen, to say the very least. Now, in terms of if there are aged care workers here today, it's important we give you some practical advice. There are exemptions. The particular direction that the Police Commissioner brought in on the 20th of August of this year provides for exemptions. There are exemptions that can be given by your medical practitioner. Find yourself a medical practitioner whom you trust. It's up to the medical practitioner to decide whether you're entitled to an exemption. You will hear nonsense peddled by SA Health that it's a matter for their adjudication. It is not. The Police Commissioner has let us down in many ways, but I think it's obvious to many of us now that he is resisting the more extreme elements within the triumvirate that's pushing this tyranny upon us. As much as he's let us down, the Premier, Mr Marshall, doesn't stand up for us. It's the tyrants in the health bureaucracy who are pushing this tyranny. The Police Commissioner is resisting it to some extent. You remember what happened when the lockdown ended, and there was a tremendous push by SA Health to insist that school-aged children had to wear masks when they returned to school. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And you remember SA Health, let me tell you this, you may or may not be aware of this, but I do know it because I spoke to many school principals and many teachers and many members of the legal profession who were acting for them. When that happened, SA Health wrote to every principal in the state of South Australia and said it was mandated that children in high school had to wear a mask. And you see how many of them have done that, how many of the principals folded. It was a complete lie. To his credit, the Police Commissioner came out and told us all it was a complete lie. Yet they persisted with it. These are the kind of people we're dealing with. It's great to see you all here, but I despair for the fact that are these all the people in South Australia that are waking up to what's going on? You don't have to be Einstein to figure it out. So in terms of a medical exemption for these old care workers, if you're an old care worker, a worker in an old care home yourself, or you know someone, or they're a member of your family, or you know them and they're too terrified to come out at the moment, speak to them and tell them that they can go to their doctor, and it's up to the doctor as to whether they get a medical exemption. There is no veto by SA Health. There is no Spurrier veto in relation to this. If she says that, or if the advertiser or if any of the other lying, filthy media who've been promoting these lies tell you that she has that veto, you tell them to ignore it and you rely upon your medical practitioner.
Correct.
In addition to that, anyone can apply for an exemption for this on a temporary basis. You can get a temporary exemption from a police officer. He's the authorised officer under the Emergency Services Act. If, and I'm quoting here from the direction, it's necessary to ensure the maintenance of the quality of care available to residents. Now that's a very broad provision, isn't it? You'll understand that when I read it to you. That's what the Police Commissioner has insisted on being in there. You won't hear that publicised by the Premier or by SA Health. You can get a temporary exemption if it's necessary for you to attend at your work to ensure the maintenance of the quality of care available to residents. So what people need to do is they need to ask the owners of these facilities to confirm that that is the case. Take a letter from them, take it to a police officer, and he's bound to give you a temporary exemption. Now there's very few of us here today. We happy few who are here today. We band of brothers and sisters. Can I ask you though to make sure your presence here is effective, go and talk to your relatives. Go and talk to the lady next door. Perhaps she's an Italian lady who doesn't speak much English. Perhaps she's an Asian lady. Go and talk to her and tell her that these remedies are available and assist her in making sure that she makes use of them. Tell them to lure up, if I may use that expression. Everyone's perfectly aware that the modus operandi of the person we're unfortunate enough to have as our Prime Minister at the moment, Mr. Morrison, that cipher of a human being, that hollow, shallow man. Everyone's aware that his modus operandi has been to shove all the dirty work off to the states. And he's done that because he wouldn't have been bright enough to come up with it, but one of his bureaucrats that has come up with it. He's doing that because, of course, it means that the constitutional protections that would generally be available in this kind of situation are no longer available. Those constitutional protections against the overreach of Commonwealth power. While I've got you all here, let me just tell you something which you You may hear from time to time from well-meaning people, they talk about the Biosecurity Act. The Biosecurity Act, the Commonwealth Act, is of no assistance to us because of the way that Morrison's conducted himself. Don't waste your time with anyone in good faith peddling information that it is. The only directions that have been made under the Biosecurity Act are the ones that keep us leaving the country and the ones that quarantine us when we come in. The rest of it is all being done by the states. Do you understand that? Can you pass the word around about that so that good people like yourselves and people who are trying to help the people who are at the point of the attack at the moment aren't misled with this with the wrong information? But one thing that Morrison's now trying to do, of course, is having pushed everything off to the States, he now thinks he'll talk his mates in big business into doing his dirty work for him. His mates at Qantas. His mates at BHP, the bigger operators of the nursing homes. He's pushing the dirty work off to him. But he's got a problem there, because unless you work for a state government instrumentality, you have remedies under the Fair Work Act. Make sure your neighbours and your friends, people who are in the aged care industry, know about this. The Fair Work Act, let me tell you, has teeth. There are plenty of remedies available under the Fair Work Act. So, for example, I've just explained to you about temporary exemptions. If the aged care worker asks for that temporary exemption and it's refused, make a note of it, get it in writing. If you're sacked, if you're not just stood down, but you're sacked by your nursing home employer, that's going to be very useful for you when you get to court. So those sorts of remedies are available, and I'd appreciate it very much if you'd spread the word. It's disappointing there aren't more people here today, because I think what everyone thinks is that, well, at least they're not coming for me. But let me tell you, nurses, they're coming for you next. Hospitality workers, that'll be you next. Where were you when the aged care people needed you? The best thing we can all do is stand together. Solidarity. Remember solidarity? That used to be the word that Labor Party people... Just because I'm criticising the Labor Party, don't think for one moment I've anything to say about Stephen Marshall, who's had the power to get in the way of these health bureaucrats who are doing this and who's done nothing. What a contemptible human being he is. But in the context of what's happening now, and on the 17th of September, when workers' rights to perform their very job is being torn up, where's the Labor Party? Where's this party of solidarity forever?
Hiding with violence.
You frauds. The best thing we can all do is to stand together. If aged care workers were able, even now 8 days out from this, if they could get together and as a group say to their nursing home employers, we're going to stand at one. If you stand one of us down, you stand all of us down. Do you think the nursing homes would be able to operate? That's what they've got to do, that's what you've got to encourage them to do, and that's what you've got to encourage the next group of workers who are targeted to do. Do you understand that? Have I said anything to you today that's useful at all? Will you please spread that amongst as many people as you can?
We will.
Look, at the beginning of this pandemic, I said to myself, I wonder what it would be like to live every day without fear. I said that to myself, and I've done my best, with the help of my religious faith, to live every day since then without fear. I encourage you to do the same. Let's help the people who need help. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Stuart. So, we don't have aged care workers. Expert to know about. Frankly ask you, and I wanted to acknowledge that that we're standing on Barna land and the traditional owners past, present into the future, but actually we're standing on big farmer land. I think we need to change that. I don't think the elders will mind. if we actually just call it for what it is, big farmland. Billions of dollars going to pharmaceutical companies for ineffective, dangerous, experimental jabs, controlling a nation and and a globe, as Stuart said, for no good reason, with no good cases. We are not here in a state of emergency in South Australia. This needs to end. This state of emergency is just, it's non-existent. How do they get away with it? I do have some messages from some of the nurses. One of them estimates that with 282 residential aged care facilities in South Australia, if 7 people left from each, that would be 1,974 staff. In South Australia alone, Australia-wide, there are 2,695 facilities, so multiply that by 7. So how does the continuity of care happen for people in aged care residents when key staff are going to be walking off the job because they're not going to take the jab? If you are a female and of fertile age, then you need to consider the possibility of pregnancy, because that will get you out of it. Could take you a while to fall pregnant, maybe years. That's something else that's come up. Hang on. Oh dear. So this is a personal experience from someone working in an aged care facility, and they of course have been under the pump for well over a year now with the mask wearing and going into homes and vaccinating the elderly. She says, I have seen the elderly be coerced into taking the vaccines by their doctors even when they didn't want it. I've seen the healthy, fit and active elderly who used to be very independent with walking around to then struggling to stand. I've seen their rosy cheeks go from pink to grey with darkness under their eyes and gasping for air while being in her car. They're dying from the inside out. I've seen large sources of infections on their skin when there was nothing wrong with their skin. In fact, their skin was so well taken care of, and then there were large amounts of cellulitis. I've seen happy-go-lucky elderly then turn into anxious and severely depressed people, and large amounts of personality changes. We had to advise, we had to cut our communication levels down with our clients and make it a small chat and then not allowed to talk about COVID stuff and the vaccine. And then we were instructed we were no longer allowed to communicate with our clients. We had to go in, do our job, then leave. Anybody need help busting someone out of a nursing home? I'm becoming quite good at it. We've been offered $50 per vaccination. If not, we'll be taken off the roster. Aged care is an area especially designed for very rare people who wanted to be a part of it. And my reason was to make these last days their most memorable, filled with love, care, nurture and laughter. All of this has been taken away. Workers I work with have had severe adverse reactions to where they're making constant hospital visits and now having seizures, uncontrollable shaking, and their lives will never be the same. And of course we know there's absolutely no transparency going on with the reporting of adverse reactions in this country. We know what's filling our hospitals and it isn't COVID, it's adverse reactions to the dangerous jabs. Shame on you, Stephen Marshall, for putting this on the workers. You've not just permanently damaged our beautiful, most vulnerable loved ones who made society to where it is today, but you've now made those beautiful workers lose their jobs or lose their livelihood because they trusted the system. They're being sorely let down. We're getting a constant stream of inquiries from people who are very, very anxious, very, very upset, very concerned for their futures, concerned for their clients, and they're only just starting with them. Next it's going to be teachers, as we say, nurses, ambos, policemen. It's just going to keep rolling on and on and on. Pity there's not 3,000 people here today, but we will be back September 18 and hopefully we'll get 3,000 then. Or more. Or more.
The last time I spoke here in front of Parliament steps, I talked about a vaccine injury that I had about 40 years ago. And I got a lot of people come up to me at subsequent rallies and show their great sympathy for the terrible years of sickness I went through. But anyone that knows me wouldn't feel sorry for me. And my wife, you know, even in the 20 years we've been together, I've never known her to feel sorry for me. The only people I've ever known my wife show true sympathy for are my enemies. And I can tell you, I have got some enemies since this pandemic. It's the government that's not taking care of us. Now, over the years, I have taken newspaper clippings out whenever there's things on anti-vaxxers, and just before the pandemic broke out, there was a clipping in the Messenger by a female journalist, and she was having a go at anti-vaxxers, and the heading was, "Pity there's not a vaccine against stupid." Right? Now be careful for what you wish for. Yeah, be careful for what you wish for. I'm going to read out, here is a banker in 1981. He was an advisor for the then President of France, Mitterrand. His name is Jacques Attali, and he was an advisor to the President of France, and this is some of his writings from 1981. "In the future, it will be a question of finding a way to reduce the population. We will start with the old, because as soon as it exceeds 60 to 65 years, man lives longer than he produces and costs society dearly. Then the weak, and then the useless who do nothing for society, because there will be more and more of them, and eventually the stupid ones. Euthanasia targeting these groups, euthanasia will have to be an essential instrument of our future societies in all cases. We cannot, of course, execute people or set up camps. We'll get rid of them by making them believe it will be for their own good. Too large a population, and for the most part unnecessary, is something economically too expensive. Socially, it's also much better for the human machine to come to an abrupt halt rather than gradually deteriorating. We won't be able to run intelligence tests on millions and millions of people, you can imagine. We will find something or cause it, a pandemic that targets certain people, a real economic crisis or not, a virus that will affect the old and the fat, it doesn't matter. The weak will succumb to it, the fearful and the stupid will believe it and ask to be treated. We will have taken care to have planned the treatment, a treatment that will be the solution. So the selection of idiots will thus be done on its own. They will go to the slaughterhouse on their own. So people have been thinking about this for decades. Now I come from a medical household. My mother's a doctor. The one big win I've had during this pandemic is I've taken a pro-vaccine woman in her 80s. There's no way she's going to get vaxxed, or my 93-year-old father. That's a win for me, okay? But my sister, who is a nurse working in Victoria, is a loss, because she has got herself vaxxed. And I can tell you, it's a terrible, terrible feeling when this happens. So in the past year and a half, I've managed to save personally a few people. Now I'm going to give you a couple of pieces of information which have just come to me in the last few days. One is, Stuart Lindsay was talking about this lack of deaths in the Adelaide hospitals, lack of COVID deaths. I've got a contact in Victoria who's been feeding me information for the last 18 months. He got in touch with me 2 days ago and he said, right, I've got some new information. Someone he knows, mother died in a Victorian hospital, and it wasn't COVID, nothing related. And this son was grieving over his mother's body, and the attending physician came into the room to sign the death certificate. And he asked the man, he said, can you do us a favour? Can we put cause of death on the death certificate as COVID? And the man said, what are you talking about? My mother obviously didn't die of COVID. Why would I do that? He said, it will help the hospital. The hospital gets a kickback of $25,000 for every COVID death that it documents. We need to get some FOIs going and find out the next person that keels over whether there's any incentive here in South Australia to have COVID deaths. Right? Because the other piece of information I just heard was that there was feedback, yeah. The other thing I heard was that there was
Really giving me the shits. Bring it up here.
No, they shouldn't.
okay, here we go. So maybe we need to do some FOIs and find out what's going on here. Because I am still suspicious that if the vaccination rate does not reach a certain point, they're going to stitch up something here, right? I have absolutely no trust in these people. They're doing it brazenly. Okay, next point. How many people have heard of Dr. Mike Yeadon? Well, yeah, who hasn't heard of him? Okay, but how many people have heard that Dr. Mike Yeadon's own sister lives here in Adelaide? How many people know that? No, okay, well I'll tell you a story. Early on in the pandemic, when Mike Yeadon first began to make his name known, he did a podcast with James Delingpole. Now I know James Delingpole for when he was here in Adelaide a few years ago. He runs some good podcasts, and Mike Yeadon at that stage was calling out the false positive rate in the PCR test. Something that none of the governments and the state governments have done in this country. The false positive rate. If you test thousands of people, how many people will naturally come up with positive? So I got in touch with Mike Yeadon, and I said to him, look, I'm just a humble sculptor working here in South Australia trying to get the word out. He emailed me back, and he said, what the hell is going on in Australia? Where are the academics? Where are the doctors speaking up? Right, they're nowhere. So he said, good on you, do what you can. He was horrified that the people in positions of power and the so-called educated were not doing more. Now, a few weeks ago, he emailed me out of the blue. In the meantime, he's become famous, right? He says no one knows him. All the right people, Mike, know you. All the right people know you. He emailed me, and why did he email me? He wanted me to make contact with his sister. This was the story. He said when he woke up that this was a very, very dark agenda and this vaccine was going to do no one any good, he wanted to get in touch with his sister who'd been naturalised in South Australia for some decades and send her information on the dangers of this vaccine. And he said to me, he said, Ammon, my sister has gone strangely quiet. What's going on? So together we put two emails to his sister. His sister's name is Jane Yeadon. I believe she's an expert in fungi. She works in biological sciences. I believe she works at Flinders University. And she has not responded to her own brother's importuning to get some feedback, and she hasn't responded to me. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm calling this out. Here we've got the sister of one of our most famous people, and he's going to be famous in future for everything he's calling out in the UK that's going on, right? We need to find out what's going on with his sister. So if anyone's got any links to Flinders University, I'd say we go and do that. Yep. And finally, at none of these rallies have I said anything about our chief health officers. But I'm going to say this. There was a quote from Shakespeare that I think quite well describes what these officers are at the moment. And that is, it was from Othello, and it was, these toads that live on the vapours of a dungeon right? These people, they're getting off on locking us up. And when I first got up at a rally last year and spoke, the first thing I said is, welcome to our convict heritage, right? Everyone thought that was a joke. How many people think that's a joke now? Right, they're getting off on locking us up. It's sadistic. But, you know, every sadist can only function if there are masochists and there are victims. And these sheep, they're victims. But while the sheep are doing the damage, while the sheep are doing this damage, they're dragging us down, you know, and then there was even a sci-fi movie made in New Zealand, I think it was called Attack of the Killer Sheep, right? So we know how dangerous they can be at the moment. They're walking around with masks, but they're actually helping to drag down the system. So, I'm going to end on this one other note. This is for the police. Is that during this pandemic, quite early on, I have had daytime, I've had conversations with quite a few police officers, male and female, that will not take this vaccine. They do not want to take it. And I've thought this for a long time, in that it's going to come to the point now, because I've heard on the grapevine that the police are only 2 or 3 weeks away from mandatory vaccinations. And so a word to the police is this, is that there's going to be nowhere to turn except to us. You are going to be our only hope if you want help to not be jabbed. Okay, so it's time the police took their masks off and stood up for the integrity of their own bodies. I don't like to see a cop wearing a mask, right? Everyone that wears a mask is a sheep. And you know what? What's that saying? Beware of sheep in wolves' clothing. Even if they've got a badge, they're still a sheep if they're wearing a mask. Stand up, because it's D-Day for the police. Thank you very much for your time.
Per person that they go and get jabbed. Now, by the end of the week, if I was to jab all of my clients, I'd get a cool $6.5 in my pocket for doing bugger all. Now, what happens with employers is that they're getting that $25,000 bonus incentive to go and get their workforce jabbed. Money is going around like it's water. It's going around like lollies, and they're giving out candy to everybody to go and get everybody jabbed. Are we getting the picture? Yeah. This is really, really alarming. It is really alarming that people are going to be, well, coerced into compromising their health for money, for someone else getting that money. It's not going to you as a mother to jab your child. You're not getting that money. Someone else is doing it. Now, has anybody seen that meme of the prince at the top of the castle who says, you know, it's a sacrifice I'm willing to make is to trade your lives. You know, well, some of you may die, but it's a sacrifice I'm willing to make. Yeah. Someone else is making money on your child being injured or dying. This is utterly, utterly reprehensible, and I cannot believe that there aren't more people here today to stand up for their children and their parents. Shame on everybody who doesn't think this is an important issue. And I'm sorry to be getting really, really angry and really, really emotional, and I will chill out. But this sort of stuff really, really gets me riled up. Now, I want to share a text message I actually got from one of my colleagues, one of my workers, about a gentleman who is on the NDIS scheme. And she wrote to me when I asked him about whether or not, well, I was asking the worker whether he had decided that he was going to go ahead and get the jab because his mother had been pressuring him. I had many, many conversations with the mother, and I wanted to make sure she understood that I would only comply with her son's consent. My job was not to talk him out of it. If that's what he wants, I'll comply. But I wasn't going to do anything without his informed consent. So I get this message, and the message reads, David told me he's just getting the shot to quieten his mum down. If all he knows is what she's telling him, then it isn't an informed choice. However, obviously they don't think David gets enough drugs, so just add another experimental one to his body. He wrote, he wasn't going to get your COVID vaccine, and if I get mine, you won't work. I enjoy having you, showing me how to cook, and while you do your job with care, you do really well. But Sev, if I get my COVID shot, you won't see me. I like seeing yous, but please keep seeing me. This man is begging not to be separated from his carer. The trouble is that the carer also doesn't want to risk being injured herself. Now, the risk of shedding is very, very real. And I already have a friend who has been hospitalised because of what appears to be pretty convincing evidence of shedding. Don't think that this is just in your minds or just on a piece of paper that you don't have to bother reading. I mean, that's just one thing that I wanted to talk about, but there's a million things I would love to talk about. If you haven't already woken up to the eugenics program, start reading, start researching, start learning about the networks and what a very, very long and involved history a lot of these pharmaceutical companies have in the eugenics programs. And this is the thing that the doctors aren't being taught or are not allowed to talk about. Do your own research. The Corbett Report has put out some brilliant, brilliant, convincing stuff. All of it you can go and cross-reference. You can go and check all this stuff on the internet. The eugenics program is very, very real, but they've deconstructed it for us so that we would buy into it. And it seems rather innocuous, doesn't it? Rather harmless. You know, it's to keep your mum safe, it's to keep your man in the nursing home safe, it's to make sure your child doesn't pass on an infection at the school, none of which was ever going to happen anyway. There is irrefutable proof by now that we are dealing with eugenicists who are sitting in this house, elected to represent us, but sending us to the slaughter. And they don't care how many of us go. In fact, the more the merrier, it would seem. If you're not aware, the Rockefeller Foundation annual report of 1968, which was titled The President's 5-Year Review, is quoted as saying, very little work is in progress on the immunological methods such as vaccines to reduce fertility, and much, much more research is required if a solution is to be found here. Now, from what I'm understanding, the spike proteins gather the most in female ovaries. Of any part of the body, male or female, the women's ovaries is what they target. Anyway, on that note, thank you very much for listening to me.
My 81-year-old dad has gone and got the injection because he wants to be the sacrificial lamb because he's worried that I'm not going to go to the shops and get food for my children. I'm not okay with this. I'm not okay with it. I'm not okay with those police officers that are just going to be forced to do something against their will. We stand for you. Now friends, we have had so much amazing information here and I'm in information overload, I tell you. I'm over the fear-mongering. I've had a really big shift in the last week, and that shift is that whether we are vaccinated or unvaccinated, the only way we get through this is through community. Is through unity, and we need to stand with the police officers. We need to stand with the vaccinated that got the injection because they felt like they didn't have a choice and they want to put food on the table, to pay their mortgages. People are doing this because they feel like they have no choice. We need to stand with them. We need to show them that we support them. Through division, through segregation, through vaccine passports, we lose. Through us getting up and getting out and just pissing everyone off. Through yelling at people wearing masks as they walk along, that creates the division. That's the game we're playing. Do not play this game. We need to play the game of love, compassion, empathy, understanding. Department of Education, you will see me preaching love, trying to get these masks off our kids. It is not in their health, it is not in their safety. We are seeing my son was bullied by teachers, not by students. We have students that are scared not of the virus, they're scared of taking their mask off and not being part of the crowd. They're scared of being vilified, they're scared of discrimination. They're not scared of the virus. People, be love, be hope, be compassion. Good on you, buddy!
indeed a warm air that comes from spring moving into summer, the warm air that stops any cold and flu virus dead in its tracks. So if you're running short of reasons why this is so farcical, just remember we stand here on big farmland and it's not right. We want to see you on September the 18th. We want to see you Monday morning supporting the parents who are fighting for their children, and we want to see you on Monday evening into next September 18th.